Stephanie was going to do the moderating, but I'm here now until we hear from Stephanie. So welcome all to the Space Farming in Agriculture in Space first meeting of NGIN with all the ambassadors on board as well. So great that to have you all here and great to see all your faces, or most of your faces at least. So today we have an very interesting speaker who is Jess Bunchek, and she will tell us all about space farming that we wanted to know and that we didn't know yet. And first we have a short intro by Nele, so take the floor.
Thank you. Okay, so thank you, Silke, the new Stephanie, and welcome to all the participants today. Thank you to the ambassadors, the NGIN Ambassadors 2022, who came up with this format and who will also lead us through this exciting learning session. I don't think I can switch off the blinging sound, so I'll just walk through it. I'll just talk through it. So my name is Nele Hermann-Valenti. I lead Bayer Crop Science's Next Generation of Agricultural Leaders efforts. I am sharing this because maybe there are some on this call or joining this call who don't know me yet. So please bear with me, all of those who have heard this numerous times before. So today, I have the honor and pleasure to open this first ever NGIN pop-up talk as the chair of NGIN. Before the floor is all yours, Silke, the ambassadors, and of course, most importantly, our dear Jess Bunchek, our NASA plant scientist star guest for today's session on Space Ag. Let me quickly share about NGIN. At the end of last year, a coalition of 17 highly diverse yet equal founding partners initiated the new Next Gen Ag Impact Network, short NGIN. This is a new global network of networks with, and most importantly, by the next generation of agricultural leaders. Our aim is to empower youth in agriculture and related fields by including you guys right from the start. Together, we are co-creating opportunities and a community to untap resources and energy for transformational impact towards the UN SDGs. And all of that with a clear focus on agriculture and food systems. NGIN includes all relevant sectors. So that is farmers, business, academia, think tanks, NGOs, international organizations, the policy sphere, and of course you, the young change makers. Each of the coalition partners, taken for themselves, are already providing young people with a host of different opportunities. However, we are sure that whatever programs, solutions, or opportunities we might be able to come up with as one organization, we can actually add positive impact when we are working together with very diverse stakeholder groups and leveraging existing areas of convergence. So NGIN sets out to increase the attractiveness of agriculture for future generations in all sustainability pillars, economic, ecological, and social. And together we co-create opportunities with young people that match your needs. In 2 weeks' time, the first ever cohort of NGIN ambassadors, the leaders of this session, will come together in Costa Rica to learn from and with each other, network and gain on-the-ground experiences in tropical regenerative agriculture. I'm certain you will soon hear more from them. Until then, please check out our website and the Instagram channel. We'll put them in the chat, and sign up with your email address to stay tuned so that we can listen to you, include you, and channel opportunities your way. You might be the next ambassadors for attractivity. But now, let's learn about space ag and how it is related to climate change, food security, and other issues and opportunities that might not be all that outer space for us on Earth. Science knows no boundaries, as World Food Prize Foundation laureate Dr. Daniel Hillel put it in 2012. So let's venture into the unknown with Jess Bunchek. And for now, over to you again, Silke, if there's anything else you would like to say. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Nele, for introducing NGIN. And I would like to shortly introduce myself as well. I'm an NGIN ambassador, so here on behalf of the NGIN ambassadors, and I see a lot of faces of the other NGIN ambassadors. So please, if you have any questions or anything else to ask, raise your hand or put something in the chat. And I would like to give the floor to Jess for like introducing herself, if she'd like to.
Sure. Thank you very much. Yeah. Hello. Good morning if you're near where I am, or good afternoon if you're farther east in the world. I'm Jess. I work here at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. So I've actually recently returned from being in Antarctica for a 14-month overwintering campaign, which I'll talk a little bit about in the next hour. But while I was there, I was working on operating a greenhouse that we are using as a test bed for growing plants on the moon and growing plants on Mars. But this is actually in addition to what we do here at the Kennedy Space Center, which is that we have plant growth production equipment that's on the International Space Station. And so I also want to talk about what's currently happening in space and with the two systems that we have up there, and how the research that is done on the ISS actually relates to what was done in Antarctica. And then also some fun ways that we find that there is also some neat correlation just with the experience of being in both of the environments. So I'll go into a little bit more detail, but that's pretty much my background. Oh, I'm a plant scientist by training, and also work a little bit from the operations side. So so it's a great environment to get to work in.
Amazing. Sounds so cool. I'm really excited to hear more from you. And that's also like the first part of the first question that we have for you. As a young person, how did you get where you're at? Like, how did you get to do all the things that you're doing right now?
Sure. Yes. So actually, it was just by looking inward and thinking, what did I want to do to get to where I am, and really just trying to focus on that. So being aware of the opportunities that are around me, really trying to take advantage of when things become available. And sometimes that's just luck. Like with working in government funding, you do have to have the luck of being in the right place at the right time, because sometimes you could be at the perfect age with the perfect amount of experience and the right ideas, but perhaps just the funding isn't there to support it. And it's not just in government. I think that's probably that does reach beyond just beyond with the government research, but it definitely is very true here. And we're thinking about how did I want to go from my background, which is actually in field agriculture, to trying to then transition to bridging my love of working with plants and feeding people with a passion for space. And was there a way to try and make that possible? And then the same thing happened with trying to go to Antarctica. Those are very unconventional paths, both personally and career-wise. And so in a lot of ways, those paths were never available. No American or North American had overwintered at the German station, which is where I was. And so it's thinking, okay, well, that this opportunity could become possible. How do we try and pave the way? And that's not just a theme that really applies to what I have found with my career thus far, but that's also just what we find with this area of research. It is so groundbreaking. There is no rule book that's ever been written for how to grow these particular plants in space or encountering these issues. So we are having to solve issues that individuals have never encountered before. So it's very exciting, very humbling, and very rewarding to be able to work in such an innovative area in all different areas.
That sounds so cool. I couldn't imagine like living up there in Antarctica. How is it for you, like living there?
It was amazing. And if you'd like, I actually do have a presentation, a few pictures and whatnot to go through. And so I can actually lead into that and then give you an impressions of what it's like to be there. So I'll go ahead and dive into it. So yes, as we're talking about growing plants in space, I just want to provide a little bit of a background of what we're doing right now. So as I was saying, we're doing some really innovative research, and what I did in Antarctica stems from everything that I was getting to do research with space beforehand. So, these right here, these are zinnia flowers that Scott Kelly grew up in space back in 2015 during his year-long mission. And as I found, with getting to live in Antarctica, if we had flowers that formed like on our fruiting crops, the smells, the sights, but also just the familiarity of having these things that looked like Earth were incredibly important. So this isn't a system that we have on the ISS called Veggie, which actually has no acronym, unlike most things that NASA comes up with. So it's the Vegetable Production System, and it's actually been up in space for just about 8 years now. And it started off with just one of these systems. You can see it grows about 6 plants in there in these little plant pillows that that's where the roots are. And then actually the system worked out really well. And so now there is a second system up there, and you can see that there's a one off to the right there. So, and we have really unique challenges when we're working with plants in space. So they can't be too big. So you can see that these actually aren't too big of spaces altogether. This is about the size of maybe a small refrigerator, you know, to put it into volume perspective of having both of these combined. And so we can only grow about 12 plants at any given time. And because the ISS is closer to Earth, they can, the astronauts can receive resupplies of fresh produce every like 3 to 4 months. And so that's really rewarding. And sometimes they even can get a treat of having, a fresh orange or a fresh apple that's sent up there. But beyond those 3 to 4 months, they don't have any fresh produce. So, so those are readily prepared meals. You know, they have just dehydrated meals that they will add water to, and then that's where all of their food comes from. And so it's a really great treat to be able to work with the astronauts to help them produce their own food. And we are looking at this not just from a supplemental perspective, to their dried diet, but also we try and look at crops that can potentially help to supplement their the nutrients in their system. This isn't the most important thing that we're looking at for the current ISS configuration, because they're not too far from Earth and because they do get to have resupply missions with fresh food every few months. So we're not super worried at this point in time about everything degrading in space, of your food starting to lose nutritional value over time. But as we're thinking, the longer that we're in space, that we could, especially as we venture into Mars, where that's calculated to be quite a long mission, then we're really wanting to evaluate which crops can help to is where those nutrients might become depleted. So, for example, we look at things like mustard greens, not only because they can add a lot of really great texture and flavor, a different variety to the diet, but also because they can be high in thiamine, which is vitamin B1. So that's one of the nutrients that we do try and look at. But again, going back to the system, it's a small size, so you have to have plants that they don't get too big, not too competitive with one another. There's no convection in space, and so we have these plastic bellows that go up around the crops, and you can see them down on this focused system right here, and then you can see them up in the system to the right. And because we don't have convection in space, then by raising the bellows and holding the plants inside of the system, we have fans that can help to actually create air circulation, and this is really important for helping the plants to move around the gases like the oxygen and the carbon dioxide that they are both photosynthesizing and respiring as they are living. So it's really important that we just don't have essentially stagnant air around the plants. And then also in the ISS, in this particular system, we are exposed to the exterior environment. So, whatever humidity, temperature, and particularly the carbon dioxide level that the station is at, that also means that we're subjecting the plants to that. And in space, just because scrubbing carbon dioxide is a pretty intense process, they actually have the ISS at about like 3,000 parts per million, and that's totally fine for humans to live in. And actually plants do too well, but we've done research here on the ground looking at carbon dioxide to see, how do plants physiologically do in pretty elevated CO2? And yeah, they take in CO2 as part of photosynthesis. That's how we get oxygen. But could there be kind of like too much of a good thing where they start to get a little bit overwhelmed? So we do look and see how they physiologically do. And some crops do great, and other crops actually just don't do too well in this environment. So they get too stressed out, either by just the microgravity, the environment, the space, or, we also look on the ground before things fly, like how palatable are they? So do people really want to eat the particular crops that we're growing? Because, and this was something I found out in Antarctica. It's not just about growing crops, it's also your crew, the people eating it. That's your end result. That's the most important factor. So in Veggie, so these are two of our astronauts. This is Christina Cook, Jessica Meir, and they're harvesting Jasminum Mustard, which is one of the crops that we've grown a few times in space, but also does really well in Eden ISS. And so it's a great texture a mustard green. But in this study, we were also looking at different light treatments on the plants. So checking to see how they differ physiologically, their chemistry, so their nutritional compound, their microbiology, so how safe are they to eat. We have found that the food that's grown in space or eaten in ISS, it's safer than anything you're going to find on the shelves in your supermarket, but we continue to test it just to make sure that our quality is going to remain as high as possible. So this is what it actually looks like when they're harvesting in space. And then this is one of the one of the great moments about getting to work with the astronauts is seeing how they really enjoy having the plants there. So, whether they're actually smelling the crops or tasting the crops, it's really great that they are, having a good time and really benefiting from having the plants up there. And some astronauts, will be more interested than others with working with the system. Some are more interested in the plants, particularly if maybe they enjoy gardening, back at home. Others will enjoy the operation side, so the mechanics are intrigued by it. But it's great to think that we do have pretty good feedback. And it's a lot of work, so on the ground, it's years that goes into preparing plants or hardware to fly. And so a couple of interns here are helping me to pack the payload. So it's where we're actually preparing the Veggie Pillows to go ahead and fly. So even though the things in space will only grow for a couple months at a time, we're always doing research down here. And then there is a second system that's on the International Space Station, which I haven't worked with directly too much, but I really do want to highlight it because it's called the Advanced Plant Habitat. And I want to highlight this because last year they had an incredible success with the system, which was growing the first fruits ever grown in space. So these are hatch improved, they're Espanola chili peppers. And chili peppers are, they were one of the plants we wanted to look at because they're high in vitamin C, which is again one of the nutrients we're trying to increase in the astronaut diet. But it's also, it provides flavor. And we've had some astronauts who want a lot of flavor in their diet. And, it just has it's a different look. You can see there's some colors and you can see the hardware that's around. It's the silver, the white. And so you really can add a lot to the environment by having the chili peppers there. And also the smell of pepper plants. It's a very crisp, sweet smell, so very unique. And from getting to grow these as well in Antarctica, I can say they're quite enjoyable to have. So the Advanced Plant Habitat does, it's a more complicated system than Veggie. And so that one of the trade-offs is that it is more complicated. And when you have more things, in your system, those are just more items that you need to potentially maintain or could break. But the APH is a really neat system because unlike with Veggie being exposed to the exterior environment, the APH is actually closed off. And so then, when plants are being grown in here, they can be regulated for any of their environmental conditions, and they're actually watered automatically as well. So, if astronauts want to interact with the plants, they still can, but unlike Veggie, it's not as time consuming for the astronauts throughout the experiment. But just like with the leafy greens, so this is Rajachari getting to enjoy a slice of the pepper on his space taco. Tortillas are a very common way to consume foods up there because they're slightly sticky. And so it's, great to see how creative they can get with some of these crops. But how does this link in with what we were doing in Antarctica? So this is the Eden ISS facility. So this was my home, well, not literally just my home, but this was my workspace for a 13-month time period. And so it's these are two 20-foot shipping containers put together. So in total, we're able to grow 12.5 square meters of food. And essentially what that means is that it's plenty of food for the overwintering team, of which we were 10 people isolated for 9 months of our entire time down there. And yeah, this is, one of the first modules that a space agency is looking at growing plants in Antarctica, and it's definitely the first of its kind where it really is a test bed, prototype for lunar and Martian surfaces. And Eden ISS is actually run by the German Aerospace Center, so Germany's space agency, which is called DLR. And so to try and work with them and to build up, the amount of science that we were conducting in Eden, then actually we were able to do an international collaboration between DLR and NASA. And so essentially it's a great testament to putting your teams together and utilizing everybody's skills, you know, and we were able to find that it was an incredibly successful year because of, you know, building up our resources by working together as two different agencies. So Eden ISS is located near the Neumeier station, and this is a little bit of Neumeier off to the right. And this is actually what Neumeier looks this time of year. It's an incredibly big station, so this is just a snippet of it. But you can see that, you know, it looks a little bit cold. So the station has some frost that's sticking to the outside of the station there. The sun is incredibly low off to the north, so you see these really long shadows. But then if you're looking, you're saying, well, where's Eden in all of this? Well, that's Eden right there. So it's, if you could find it. So it's actually 400 meters from the station, and it was put outside of the station because it was a, you know, an add-on idea. So it was not part of the original design for the station, and nothing like this had ever been tested inside the station before. And so for this Eden 1 version, then you know, the compromise was, okay, we'll put it outside the station and see how it does. And then, you know, fortunately it's been successful, and now we're in the process of designing the second version, which will be integrated into the station and hopefully be more accessible to the crew. But the Antarctic environment is quite extreme, so you know, we have these whiteout blizzard conditions. And so, you know, this is not an edited photo. You really just can't see very far at all when you get these blizzard conditions. No horizon, we call these whiteouts, because there's no differentiation, there's no contrast. And these are quite common. So you think, you know, as you first get down there, everything's going to be, you're just like, there's no way, you know, like anyone can survive here. But it is amazing to see what we humans are able to, you know, become used to and really adapt to it. It's quite impressive. But then after these storms, one of the, you know, the interesting parts about having an exterior container in Antarctica is that you do get drifts that build up. So this is a pretty typical look of after a storm. I'd walk out to eat it, and you can see my shovel kind of poking out of the snow there, and it's really hard packed snow. So you know, you get out there and you start your day with a good workout of trying to dig out your shovel and then using your shovel to dig out your container. And then you get to go inside. And so outside you have this really, you know, it's incredibly beautiful, but it's a harsh environment. And then you go inside, you have this incredibly warm environment with all these different colors, you know, all these different smells. You do have different sounds because there are the pumps for the aeroponic systems are running. And, you know, we have other machinery in there just keeping everything going. And so it's this oasis that exists in here. And what's really neat is that throughout the year, we have great contrast with the day length, because we have polar day and polar night and everything that, you know, is in between that time. And it's absolutely beautiful all throughout the time of the year. But what is nice that I found was that getting to work inside Eden, it didn't matter what time of year it was. It didn't matter what was happening outside. It was a very nice, constant environment here. And so it was a great way to come in here and just connect with the plants and get to work. And it was really cool too to come out and you could smell the life that was existing inside of this greenhouse. So this is a pretty early look at what the season would look like. You know, the plants are not super huge yet. But yeah, for having plants for over, you know, one constant year, whereas on the ISS, we do just have those plants for a short amount of time. It really was wonderful to be able to have crops available, you know, for pretty much most of our dinner times throughout our growing season. But I showed you guys those Espanola peppers, the Hatch Improved, that were on the ISS. And so at the same time, we're getting to grow these peppers in Eden. And so that's a great example of how we're looking at growing the same crop from a science perspective. It gives us different systems to grow in. So how does the same crop work in Antarctica in this aeroponic system, where they were very happy, you know, they weren't stressed at all because we were able to tailor the environment to fit them best. And how does this compare with the testing we've done here at the Kennedy Space Center to prepare the plants? And then how does that compare with how the plants have been performing in space? So we're not just looking at their horticulture, like how big the fruit are, how many fruit, but also the nutritional content and the microbiology. So it's really exciting that we get to have these plants. And also, you know, one of the great things about Eden is that because it is such a large test bed, we also get to take some more risks, you know, with this station or with this system versus where we would on the International Space Station, because you know, we have more time to work with plants in space. So one of the great things about this past year was getting to test a new crop in Eden ISS, which were beans. And beans haven't been tested in space yet. And so, and I can say it was wonderful to have a crop, you know, these are legumes, and I didn't have any other legume crops. And so it was great to have the different look of the plant, the different texture of the fruit, the different looking flowers that smelled really nice. So you know, the sensory experience is a very important part of having plants in this environment. It's not just supplementing the diet, you know, it's also everything that comes with that. And that includes herbs. So this is thyme, and with harvesting in the greenhouse, the whole entire place was just overwhelmed with the amazing smell of thyme. And I was harvesting oregano and rosemary that day. So it was just like being in it was this intoxicating spa of wonderful smells. So yeah, increasing the variety is an incredible part of what we were doing in Eden. And there's a lot to learn from Eden. You know, a lot of the challenges that we had came from being in such an extreme environment, and hoping that maybe the next time when we're inside the station, we won't have to deal with some of these certain things. But other problems that we had in Eden, those are problems that we're going to have to go forward and say, okay, we really do need to find solutions for this, like finding more robust hardware. The farther away from Earth that we get, the harder it's going to be to get replacement parts, and so we need to have things that last a long time and can be repairable. And that was incredibly true in Antarctica, where we were cut off from the world for 9 months. And even at that point, once people would start to come back in our second summer season, we may not be able to have resupplies of equipment right away. And so we really are having to be incredibly resourceful with whatever we have and stretching things. And fortunately, you know, for Eden, we had plenty of spare parts on hand, but yeah, there were some times where I thought, well, okay, this is great, but if one more of these breaks, then what are we going to do? So it really does come down to planning and building really strong systems, you know, and becoming more water and energy efficient. That's a universal theme, not just for Antarctica, not just for space, but for anywhere. So you know, no matter what we're doing, we're trying to find innovative technologies that will apply not only to going forward in space, but to also make crop production better here on Earth. So, so I want to make sure I'm leaving enough time to continue to answer questions, but hopefully this helps to at least give an overview of what's going on in terms of space production. So I'll turn it back over. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to share a little bit.
Yeah, thank you so much. It really, like I've already read in the chat, that people are mesmerized by your pictures and the words that you're saying. It sounds really amazing. And I think like living in Antarctica must already be like feeling as if you're on a different planet or something. Like
yeah, absolutely. It really does.
So you've already sort of been up to space. Yeah. What I'm interested about, and what was also one of the questions that some of the other NGIN ambassadors sent in, was that you've been mentioning that most of the crops right now that grow up in space are for the astronauts to feel and like eat something different. Is there any possibility that agriculture in space would be play some kind of role for our food consumption here on Earth? Or
we do try, and you know, with our research, one of the important things about publishing it are trying to share, you know, what we're finding, particularly with technologies that work. So we particularly how this applies to like controlled environment agriculture, so like indoor farming, vertical farms, as we're looking at things like how to be more water efficient. You know, we're working with companies about, you know, how do we improve our spraying techniques, our water application techniques, but also how are we making sure that the food, you know, like pest control. So what kind of tactics are we implementing as part of like an integrative pest management plan or prevention plan? And, you know, even with the crops that we're researching, we are trying to work with, you know, sometimes we're buying crops right off the shelf. Like what's kind of great is that a lot of the leafy greens that we grow in space, you can just go and, you know, Google them and you can find those exact same crops and, you know, contact the company and get a packet of seeds and do it yourself. And other times we are, you know, we have certain requirements that we're looking at. And like because of the size constraint that we have in our ISS environment, like, or a transit vehicle for going to Mars, then, you know, we might work more directly with breeders and think, okay, like, you know, we have this problem, can you help us? And so we're hoping that because we have very unique challenges and very unique systems, that we're able to focus on solving, you know, particular problems, and then that can definitely apply back to helping the industry to adopt these new technologies that we're developing. One of the ones that, you know, the biggest one that I always think is fascinating that comes from the research here is that back in the 1980s and 90s, this was the place where LED lights were first tested for looking at plant production, and now that's the standard across the industry. Or, you know, we are also looking at having the different colored lights. So, you know, through all the different systems, you're seeing like the purple lighting that we have, and that's because that particular lighting is, you know, targeted to best suit photosynthesis in the plants. And so, you know, that can also apply back to the industry. And also the big one too is really looking at the relationship that we have with plants. And this has become much more public of, you know, gotten more into the public mind, particularly with the pandemic, because when people couldn't go out, then a lot of people were turning towards, you know, having plants at home or getting into gardening. And so I think people became more aware of their relationship with plants. And, you know, we're not the first to think like, oh, you know, people and plants go well together. But unfortunately, in the past, a lot of that relationship has been assessed qualitatively, so through anecdotes and not really in a way that we can look at it as scientists and say that, you know, oh, how sound and widespread is this data. So one of the groundbreaking things that we look at with our research, both on the ISS and we integrated this year with Eden, is actually assessing with the crew, like when you have no other source of fresh food, like what is your perception with having plants around, you know, the sensory, you know, how we're breaking it down by the different senses that you're experiencing, you know, if you're interacting with the plants, like how are you thinking with that, you know. And we had the changing environment outside and a very extreme environment outside. So, you know, how was our relationship with this constant environment that was full of so much life affected? And so, because we have an isolated environment without all of these other, you know, factors that can cause noise in our data, then we are now looking at quantifying the what we call the biobehavioral health of having plants in such an extreme environment, and how that, particularly with the astronauts, and how that can link back to performance. You know, the longer that you're in this, you know, these roles and you're on your missions, like we were working in Antarctica constantly for 14 months with, you know, no vacations, no full weekends off, you know, you're because anything can go wrong, you know, the storms happen, so you're always working. And so we're looking at really how plants can help us to hopefully perform better longer, not just nutritionally, but also from a psychological aspect.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think it's really important what you mentioned, that we should still like keep the connection with plants, and that due to a pandemic, people have become more connected to plants, which is really interesting. And what you're mentioning is also like this changing environment and like a harder environment you're growing plants in. How do you see space agriculture looking in like 10 years or 20 years from now, with our environment also in this earth changing? Do you think it will like change things or change the way that we view agriculture?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the areas I mentioned a couple of times are becoming more like energy efficient or water efficient. So those are our consumables that we have. And Eden was a great example, you know, of, okay, this is like not the best that we could be doing, because we had a very warm, humid environment that was in, you know, this incredibly cold exterior environment. Like, you know, like it takes a lot of work to get it to be that way. And also because, you know, we have a direct energy connection back to the station, which was very helpful, but we were off the grid when it came to water. So it was, you know, manual preparation of the water, filtering it, you know, to remove any nutrients, so that we were starting with a known electroconductivity level, so known like base level of concentration. So when we added our fertilizer for the aeroponic system, we knew we were sticking with the chemistry we wanted. But on all of the water that came out to the station that had, you know, I had to bring that out on sleds or bring it out, you know, with equipment. And so then bring it back and then process it in the station. So actually seeing firsthand how much water you use to produce plants. It's like, okay, you know, like you need a certain amount, but can we get better? And we also look at that with space systems. So before we grow anything in space, the planners for the International Space Station come to us and say, how much water do we need to allocate for your study? Because they have a limited amount of water in space, and so they have to budget this ahead of time. And that's going to definitely still be true when we go to the moon and go to Mars. You know, we're gonna have to make our water there. That's work. And even in Antarctica, you know, we're surrounded by snow and ice, but our technicians, they were having to, you know, bring in water and process the water to get it there for us. So it's time and work. And here on Earth, you know, if you're in a fortunate country, like the United States or some certain parts of the United States, we fortunately don't have to think about water at this point in time yet, but a lot of places on Earth do already, and it's going to become an even more stressful topic. And so if we can find ways to produce crops better, then that's going to be really important for helping to make places that are already producing crops more energy efficient and water efficient, but also places that are food deserts, can we then provide them opportunities with better technologies to produce crops? And you know, like we look at refugee areas or like literal deserts, or right now the Canadians work with indigenous tribes up in the high Arctic where they would not have fresh produce. So, and that's another challenging environment. So we are 100% trying to make it all apply.
Do you think it will work out?
I'm optimistic about it. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
I hope so too. It's for the future of our Earth.
I'm very excited. Very excited to see where the technology is going to go.
Yeah, cool. One other question that we had is, how can the research done on space farming inform regenerative agriculture?
Well, we do look at, you know, we try and look at the full closed system, and I think the closest that we do get would be something like with Eden, because it had so much. And so we're looking at you know, how much edible biomass per plant, how much inedible biomass per plant do we have. And in Antarctica, we did have that luxury because nothing can stay in Antarctica because of the Antarctic Treaty. So there was already a system in place for like any plant waste was processed similar to how like kitchen, you know, food waste would be. And so we had a place to put it, and then it all gets shipped back to Germany for processing, or, you know, for any other station, it goes back to their station's country, you know, for processing. But that is something that even during when I was down there, it was, you know, I was thinking like, you know, which plants are really, you know, have an incredibly high edible to inedible biomass ratio. Great, let's have those. Which ones, you know, are okay, and which ones are just definitely off the table. So with that environment, no, yeah, we were not able to actually go one step further and think, how do we process and really make this into a closed loop system? But these are things that we are looking at. Even while I was down there, we're talking with individuals here, you know, in Florida, who are looking at different technologies. They look at what's like trash to gas, you know, or compost tea. So they are currently researching, even though it wasn't implemented into Eden, you know, the technologies for plant recycling. But in Eden, you know, all the air is recycled. The nutrient solution to a certain point is recycled until it becomes exhausted, you know, and then it gets taken away. But like the ISS, they recycle up there. And so, and even within, you know, there's a lot of work being done for these tactics. And so it's just, you know, I think as we continue going forward with prototypes and systems, and we'll continue to be able to integrate more and more people, you know, into the conversation. And then we'll be able to implement their technologies and get, you know, like if we're at like 80% regenerative now, like then we'll get to like the 90% level.
Yeah, thank you. And you've already mentioned it a bit, like saying that there are some plants that really can't go into the systems and some plants can. This is also links to one of the questions that we had. What are the main crops that can be harvested in space and maybe also through regenerative agriculture, and why?
Yeah, so a lot of the ones we look at are things like leafy greens, because they grow pretty quickly. They're fast to harvest. So, you know, you just either by hand, you can snap off the leaves, or just with scissors, cut them off really quickly. And we've looked to as at having harvest where you just cut the whole plant, like a single harvest, versus coming back for like repetitive harvest and letting the plant continue to grow. And we look at that also with like fruit, you know, so small fruit like the chili peppers, or right now, like in Eden, we were researching Red Robin tomatoes is one of our 4 different tomato varieties. And actually Red Robin is currently in its its final like equipment testing here on Earth before it is going to fly. So we're going to try and have a second fruit crop in space in the near future. And so, yeah, we look at crops that are not only good for like the system requirements itself, but also don't take up too much time. When we're looking at, if we went from one plant generation to the next plant generation, at this point in time, we're not exploring, harvesting the seeds from a plant and then putting it into the next system. That we, at least with how Eden worked, we didn't need to do that. And we also didn't have the space to have like, this amount of crop is for us to definitely eat, and this amount of crop we want to allocate to let go to, to seed and to become viable. And one of the, we have two reasons for that. The first is that we really don't need to, we have good seed preservation methods, and we're thinking even for something like Mars, for the most part, we can take, you really, if you're experienced with growing plants, like how to get good germination rates, you can stretch your seed bank for quite a long time. But also with certain plants, a lot of the ones that we work with, just because of their genetics, if we were to take the seeds from those plants and regrow them, they may not grow as robustly, or we may not be as confident in their production, or their genetics may just change a little bit, and we may not have the success, much success with them. So yeah, we're not as interested in that, but it is still something that make everything closed loop. We do look at a little bit.
Interesting. Like hopefully we can at one point get all the veggies and greens that we need on Earth, also in space, but it will be interesting.
Exactly.
Next to like growing everything in space, there was one question regarding insects and pesticides or pests. How are the crops in extreme weather and environment best protected against pests and other stress?
Yeah, so we're really lucky in Antarctica, particularly with having this exterior container, because there are no insects there. So that was really cool to not have to worry about that. No pests, we didn't have any penguins, getting in and eating the greens or anything. So no issues with that. It's a really lucky environment. We are, both in space and Eden, I shared a photo, like one of the ones at the end, I'm wearing gloves. And so gloves are standard for working with the plants, just because we don't want to accidentally, spread anything to them, particularly like, any human pathogens, so we're all really careful about our own personal hygiene, but there are also protocols in place for when you're going to interact with the plants. And those are pretty standard. The industry has the standards, for food production. That's why the food we eat is safe when we buy it. And so we also do certain things, and making sure our tools are clean, that we're cleaning the produce, but also when we're sending things to space, we prepare things with incredible attention to detail. So we are making sure that all of our materials are clean. We sanitize the seeds in a way, and there's been a lot of work done to look at how do we clean the seeds so that we get rid of the bad things without killing the seeds, and also without killing so much of like the really beneficial microbes that the seed needs to thrive. We want to make sure we leave those. And so that's part of like planetary protection. And even with sending things to Antarctica and working there, there's a lot of environmental protection. So those are really important tactics that we already have in place. We're trying to make sure that we're not bringing any stragglers with us. And so far it's worked out pretty well, fortunately.
Oh, good. That sounds better. A place without mosquitoes and insects.
Yeah.
But what factors can affect vegetables production in space? It was also one of the questions in the chat.
Mm-hmm. So one of the ones I haven't touched on, because I've talked about like the environmental conditions of the space, but we also have to find out what nutrients work well for plants. So in veggie, at this point in time, we don't have the ability to just give like a fertilizer mixture to the plants. There's so many safety constraints that are in place that, even if we have an idea for new innovation, it has to go through so many reviews to ensure that we're not introducing any risks to the space environment. So at this point in time, we use like pre-mixed fertilizer, and we also do a lot of testing on the ground to figure out, well, what kind of fertilizer is going to work best with this particular plant. So that's all part of our preparation work. In Eden, the plants were all open to each other. So we had to have plants that weren't going to be too particular about their environment, because even if the only thing that you could really change would be the lighting above a particular plant, but even then it was going to have the neighboring plants around it. So it wouldn't do a whole lot. But then we had fertilizer mixture that would work well for our crops that needed like more nutrients, and fertilizer that worked well for the crops that needed fewer nutrients. But that's it. You know, we didn't have the ability to go, okay, like look at this plant, it needs this, and look at this plant, it does this. And so not only are we trying to find crops, like species that do well, but even within that, we need to find particular cultivars or varieties that will thrive in this environment. Essentially, you need to have like a good team player as a crop. And sometimes, like for me, you know, spinach, not a good team player. It was just too particular. And that seems to be something that fortunately is not just for Eden or for what I was doing, but that's just a notoriously difficult crop. So we have to do a lot of work. All the work ends up coming down to, you know, they have to be good, nutritious, safe to eat, grow well, be robust, germinate well. Like they have to be just all around like awesome crops to have. But fortunately, we have a whole bunch of ones that we have found.
Yeah, so we won't invite spinach onto our next team meeting with NGIN.
We'll keep working on it.
Okay. And talking about team players and environments as well, then there was a question from Robert in the chat asking about ecosystems and like fungi, bacteria. There's all sorts of things interacting with plants, and he asked if it's possible to create like a novel new ecosystem for these plants.
Probably. Admittedly, so I won't answer too much on this one because my area is not particularly in microbiology. But this is something that, you know, it's a potential, and, you know, we do have microbiologists who are exploring this. The big thing is that, you know, it's trying to make sure that we, you know, a lot of times if people are making, the people who make decisions, they hear like microbes and they immediately associate it sometimes with being like, you know, okay, this is going to be bad. So the question is, you know, how do we try and portray that, you know, actually having a good microbiome it's really necessary. You know, it's a soilless environment that we have, but like soils have the microbiology is such an important factor, you know, for growing crops. So it is something that, you know, our microbiologists are working at, but admittedly it's beyond the scope of my research.
Yeah, so maybe these questions, like the following questions, are also a bit beyond your scope of research, but
potentially, yeah.
Quite interesting. But the questions are about the soils. So have you tested the soils for crop support on space? And like, how do the nutrient value of these plants grown in these environments, compared to the plants grown like normally in our Earth soil?
Yeah, so that's kind of the general, sorry, that reaction is kind of the general reaction to that idea, to be really candid. Yeah, so we have soil here on Earth, which is just amazing. You know, can talk about soil all day. It's so great. But then you go to other planetary bodies and they have what we call regolith, and regolith it's complicated. It's incredibly dusty, at least the regolith that we have. The samples that have come back from the moon and from Mars, you know, the structure is really bad for plants. It's physically really bad. The chemistry is really bad. Everything's really bad. And so with looking at it, it has like three parts to it. So it's like, first off, what are the issues? And then how do you get it to even be like suitable for plants? And then actually like going and trying and doing that. So building the structure and making it as soil-like as possible. And then trying to test it with crops, particularly with novel crops. This has been done a little bit, but it's an area that it's really difficult. And because there's so much success with growing things hydroponically or aeroponically, or like in the veggie system and with the APH in space, we use those pillows or the packages, they're full of a clay mixture. And so that helps to, you know, hold the water, you know, but also create some airspace so you don't have either drought or hypoxic conditions for your plant roots. But that's not soil. It's not going to be the same. So the question is, if we're already trying to, you know, we've found systems that work and we're trying to make them more water efficient and, you know, make them easier, the regolith seems to be a complicated area. So the verdict is still out for some people, but it seems the majority of us are like, why are we still working on it?
So you would say that we don't need earth or soil at all, like in the future?
Potentially when we would look at like incredibly large things, like if we were to get like trees, you know, like we're talking a long ways down the future and we just get really large crops, you know, it's been sometimes proposed in concepts like, could we have like like sitting areas, really for enjoyment, or like, but also trees that might be like fruit trees or something, that really would just exceed what we can do with our soilless environments like then. But at least for the near future, with what we're just trying to do now, it seems like it might be like a little bit of a distraction. So I think it's good that we're still looking at it, because eventually, if we were going to need it for a very, very large plant, then it's good to start earlier rather than later on solving it, particularly because it is so complicated. But at least with what we're doing right now, we're doing it very, very well. And it's not just with Eden, that's a version of having this large production, but there are also a lot of indoor agriculture production facilities that are relying on soilless designs.
Yeah, cool. Thank you so much. Just to keep time in mind, is there anyone else that wants to speak up or take the floor? There were also already some questions in the chat, but maybe someone wants to give it a go and talk to Jess as well. I'm not really sure if I'm putting anyone on spot right now. I would like to give the floor to anyone who would like that as well. And otherwise, we'll just keep it to chat questions. That's also fine. Nimesh was opening his camera, but wasn't sure whether he wanted to ask something. Oh.
Thank you so much.
I'm having a hard time hearing from my end.
Yeah, me too.
Okay.
Yeah, you're not the only one.
No.
So, no. Nimesh, I think your internet is a bit down.
Hello, could you hear? Hello.
Now, yes.
Yeah.
Could you hear me, please?
Yeah, now it works.
Thank you. It's really fascinating to see this amazing work, amazing job that you are doing. So I want to ask that, would you please share some tips to make career in this field for a young agriculture professional? Thank you.
Yeah,
got some fans,
absolutely. So if I hope I heard right. So some career advice for young people in the field. Yeah. So my with coming from agronomy, I'll just say I've talked a little bit about how I had this very unconventional way of getting here, so that may not apply to everyone, but I have found coming from outside agriculture, agronomy as a background, and then getting to come do this research, have been some surprising skills that have really come in handy, even in a place I was it's never I worked with corn and soybean and invasive species, it's never going to apply. But I have found that having a really strong understanding of statistics has been very helpful, particularly with designing complex studies, figuring out ahead of time if what your data is you want it to look like, when you working backwards and designing your studies, having statistical skills are very important. And I found that as agronomists, that's something that academically they really do try and make sure we know. So that's great. Also with understanding all of the ecology, when you're working with growing plants, it's not just you put the plant in the soil and then you add water and there's your plant. That there's so many factors, and particularly if you work outside, you have to take into account your pests, your market, your climate, as well as weather patterns, the machinery. It's you guys know it's so much that goes into this. And when working with something like a system in space, it's not just the plants, it's everything else. It's their schedules, it's the environment happening around it. It's, and even in Eden, I found that it was great to have come from farming where my schedule was flexible and had to be flexible because the weather was always going to be the one in charge of when I was doing field operations. And that is so true with Antarctica, that you have to be really flexible and really willing to, you have to be malleable with what you're doing. And then also looking at, as we're talking about, soil and regolith, having an understanding of just soils in general is incredibly important. That's, I think, an underrated skill to have. So, no matter if you are looking to get into this particular area or what you're doing, just know that what you're doing as skills are not just great agronomy skills or in a comparable field, but also they're skills that, are very valuable for other areas too.
Yeah, thank you. And I think this also relates quite to the last question on the chat. How do we train the next generation of agronomists to understand all of this? So possibly like getting more into soil statistics. Anything else?
Yeah. One of the areas where I found that, at least like with my background, it was a bit lacking, was getting to really utilize like robotics or the fact that we have like precision agriculture, the integration of GPS technology. So, the work that I was doing involved a little bit of different technology, but I think that, there's something so traditional and great about getting to work in agronomy. You're carrying on a tradition. It's ingrained into who we are as people, and our culture does matter with that as well. But the technologies and the innovations that we have, sometimes, at least from the perspective that I came with, the innovations meant like plant innovations, or what kind of ideas were we using? So what kind of methods were we using, to work with our crops? But they're, definitely keep an eye on the technology that's out there and stay present with what's available, because not only is that really important for staying, up to date on, staying integrated to where technology is going so you don't get too far behind, but also with the problems that you may have, or what you're interested in, there may actually be, a way to get really inspired by technology and to integrate it so that can really further the research and the work that you're going to be doing. The other one is, definitely finding groups, teams, mentors, others that are very supportive. So, I have to say that with, for example, like getting to be, a young researcher, but also a female researcher getting to work at NASA, which was historically very male, it's a very big honor to get to work in an area that is heavily female. And even the graduate research I did in agronomy was heavily female. And that's just, and we worked well together because we were incredibly supportive of each other. And I think that, that's not just for like women supporting women, but for anybody being a supportive individual, that what I have found are that the projects and the teams that I have found, we are the most successful with, we're also having fun with each other, but we're also being honestly supportive of each other. So if you're finding individuals who, are going to be negative and closed off and, and not be open to new ideas, which, sometimes as a woman, I've gotten that, in the end, it's actually like, well, if you were going to think this way, then you're probably not going to be the best individual to contribute to a team. And why would we want to be with you? So in reality, if you come across negative individuals, just keep your head high and also think that, it's, when you find good teammates, that's, focus on those individuals, and there are always going to be negative people out there, and just think like, just, you got to ignore them and you'll be great without it.
Yeah, you got to ignore those spinaches.
Yeah.
In the environment. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jess. I think this is a great wrap up also for this meeting and all those kind words, and also a good thing to keep in mind also with the NGIN, all the NGIN ambassadors that are here, and we're working as a group. And we'd like to take like a quick group picture all together now. So like some people want to turn on the camera also, like we could see more faces, and otherwise we'll just take a picture. I don't know if Nele is taking a picture or Sander. No? Okay. Sander, could you take the picture?
Yeah, I will do.
Yeah. Okay, perfect.
There's everybody popping up. Great.
Not me, but I want to say thank you. Thank you so much, Jess, and thanks to everyone for all these great questions. I think this was an awesome first NGIN pop-up talk, and really, I am so happy with this. Thank you so much, Jess. For
it's
popping
my
up.
pleasure. Yeah, it's my pleasure. And again, thank you so much for having me. It's been a really great honor to be here for the first one, especially. But thanks everyone for taking the time to stop in and ask questions too.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jess. I think I can speak for all of us, and Nela also already said it, that it was great talking to you, and it was so interesting
Thank
to
you.
learn more about agriculture. So let's file
Thanks.
for a last picture, and we'll wrap up the meeting.